She's a sit-in-the-back person, she said. Like yoga.
Available?
Can I speak? Hello. Oh yeah, it's working. I think so. Okay. Pardon? I think it was on.
Hey, 1, 2.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 2018 Empey Lecture. My name is Deanna Williamson. I'm the chair of the Department of Human Ecology. And it's important for us to begin this afternoon with an acknowledgement that the University of Alberta is located on Treaty 6 territory, traditional lands of First Nations and Métis people. We respect the histories, languages, and cultures of all First Peoples of Canada, whose presence enriches our community. As some of you know, the Empey Lecture is held in honor of Dr. Elizabeth Empey, who was the Dean of Home Economics at the University of Alberta from 1960 to 1976. The annual lecture serves as a reminder of Dr. Empey's contributions to the discipline of home economics and to the University of Alberta. And it's an opportunity to highlight the work that we do in human ecology, work that enhances everyday life. This year is especially significant as we celebrate the 100th anniversary of home economics and human ecology programs at the University of Alberta. In addition to welcoming alumni, current and former faculty members and staff, students, family, and friends who are here with us in Edmonton, I'm delighted to also send greetings to those who are viewing the live stream lecture in locations across Alberta and actually around the world, including alumni who have gathered together in Calgary, Red Deer, Olds, Medicine Hat, and Grand Prairie. I'm so very pleased that you are all able to join us this afternoon from wherever you might be. And of note is that Ken Coburn, Dr. Empey's great cousin, is part of the audience in Calgary. Welcome, Ken. Ken's dad was Dr. Empey's cousin, and he recently recounted his memories of visiting Dr. Empey in Edmonton and in Victoria after she retired from the University of Alberta. And he also let us know that Dr. Empey would have turned 100 years old on March 16th this year. So it's kind of an interesting and fitting coincidence that the Centennial Empey Lecture falls on the eve of Dr. Empey's 100th birthday. Now, just before I introduce our speaker, and in keeping with the Centennial theme for a minute, I'm really excited to announce a special Centennial project. Reflecting our passion of textiles, department staff and volunteers are going to be creating a signature quilt. Signature quilts have a long history, functioning both as a keepsake and as a means for fundraising. And we will be pursuing both of these goals through our Centennial Signature Quilt Project. There will be 100 signature triangles available for signatures of alumni, students, and current and former faculty members and staff who make a donation. Funds raised through the Quilt Project will support the Textile Conservator Endowment. The completed quilt will be on display in time for Alumni Weekend in September. So we have a bit of work to do in the next few months. But more information on how you can add your signature to the commemorative quilt will be available in the lobby following the lecture, and you can also speak to Lori Moran if you have questions. And now to why we are here. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. Sherry Ann Chapman. Sherry Ann is a professional human ecologist with a PhD in human ecology, a master's degree in museum studies, and an undergraduate degree in history. She's an adjunct assistant professor in the Department of Human Ecology, and she teaches several of our courses, including our foundations course in human ecology. I've known Sherry Ann for a number of years and have learned a few things about her in that time. And one of those things, which I very much admire, is that she is a passionate person and scholar. Sherry Ann thinks and feels very deeply. And one of her passions is human ecology. As such, she has focused significant time and energy in a thoughtful and critical examination of home economics and human ecology, our history, the values that underpin our work, the theories that guide our research and practice, and the influence that home economists and human ecologists have had and continue to have in our world. In short, Sherry-Ann is particularly well-suited to offer an informative and thought-provoking presentation about home economics and human ecology. In her lecture today, she will guide us through the establishment and evolution of home economics and human ecology over the past century, including stories of practitioners and reasons to take pride in our discipline. Following Sherry-Ann's presentation, there will be time for questions, including some from our audience in Calgary. As well, once we wrap up here in the lecture theater, I hope that you will be able to join us for light refreshments in the lobby to continue to talk about some of the ideas that Sherry-Ann introduces in her lecture. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Sherry-Ann Chapman.
Good evening. Yes, this is great. This is quite something to be standing here and looking and seeing the amazing variety of familiar faces. Thank you so much for being here. This is very exciting. Thank you for this opportunity to participate in the Centennial celebration of home economics and human ecology at the University of Alberta. I feel very deep gratitude for this opportunity to stand in this circle with you in person and online. How exciting to hear about the groups that have actually gathered in person. And I know there are individuals that I know of that are also tuning in. I'd like to echo the gratitude for where we gather and how fortunate are we to be gathering on the banks of the North Saskatchewan River in Amisqueechee-Waskahegan, on Treaty 6 lands, the ancestral lands of the Pappas Chase, the homeland of the Métis Nation, in a place currently known as Edmonton, at the University of Alberta in 2018. As I have prepared for today, I wanted to learn more about Dr. Elizabeth Empey, for whom this lecture is named. And from Dr. Betty Crown, I have learned that Dr. Empey was fun-loving. People loved her. She was a great mentor. She was a nutritionist, yet she organized the development of family studies in clothing and textiles too. And I had also just delighted in knowing that Dr. Empey would turn 100. I had no idea that she'd be turning 100 tomorrow. So I just have to say, I don't usually do this. I was born on March 16th. Years ago. And I was just holding that part to myself. I can't resist. That's very cool. I think that's very special. I was just thinking, isn't this amazing that her life is in step with this series of stories that we're going to share. Happy birthday, Dr. Empey. One way that I've been learning about Dr. Empey is through a small research project in which these inspiring people have agreed to be in conversation with me. Thank you. You range from Professor Emeriti through midlife career to recent and new graduates. And everybody is connected with the University of Alberta directly or indirectly. One person is a graduate of the University of British Columbia. These past 30 years have seen a great deal of change in human ecology and home economics, post-secondary programs. In conversation with Dr. Diane Kieran, you used the word loss. There have been programs that have been lost amid reorganization of campuses. I've heard about the University of Saskatchewan, and their program was disestablished. The University of British Columbia's program, the University of Manitoba. Through this project, I feel like I've been collecting fragments with purpose and bringing them into these conversations to those who knew this landscape in the past. And with your help and patience, this project is about piecing together, I think, fragments to inform understanding of the present, to inform steps into the future. Thank you to all who contributed. This evening, I will offer an interpretation. There are many. I'll offer one. To prepare for this evening, I found myself turning to the idea of imagination, particularly reflexive imagination, as described by Shaw and Crowther. And with this lens, I imagine what our capacity is to see the recent identity of human ecology, and before that, of home economics, and before that, of household economics, and to remember the traditions of this field of study and profession. We have studied and we continue to address perennial practical perennial problems, to quote Marjorie Brown. These are often recurring concerns faced by each generation over long periods of time and across cultures. We focus on everyday life. And as a field, we have some standard stories about our roots in North America. Often we speak of the Canadian Adelaide Hunter Hoodless, who founded the Women's Institutes in 1897. She was an educational reformer, and she was key to the establishing of the Macdonald Institute in Guelph, Ontario. That was a place for training women in home-making education. Also, a Canadian contemporary, Alice Chown, was also active in household economics, also at the turn of the century, identified as a suffragist, a pacifist, a feminist. And Ellen Swallow Richards, a key part of our standard stories, an American, who, it's described, she proposed the study of the betterment of living conditions through conscious endeavor for the purpose of securing efficient human beings. She was an advocate of public health, founder of ecology, champion of women's education in the sciences, and the first professional female chemist in the United States. Also, we refer to the Lake Placid Conferences. These 10 conferences between 1899 to 1908 in New York State. One of them was in Boston, and Canadians did attend. They were led by Ellen Swallow Richards and Melville Alice Dewey, of the name Dewey that you might recognize. And they tried to unite the study through these conferences, the study of the home under one name, to organize a body of knowledge. And in 1908, they adopted formally a name for this field. They chose home economics, and that was in tandem with establishing the American Home Economics Association. We could stop there and affirm, yes, that's how we see ourselves, that's our identity, those are our traditions. But let's not. I'd like to invite us, let's step into this reflexive imagination and really wonder about the stories that are told about home economics, human ecology history, about how the present might be shaping how we tell these stories, about how new insights about this field might inform the future. As you look at this list of terms, I'm guessing that some words might prompt some word association, some reminiscing. Maybe you've never associated some of those words with home economics or human ecology history. What comes to mind? Where do we begin? Well, why not with Miss Patrick? Might anyone have known or studied Miss Patrick Anybody? Oh, lovely. Okay. I didn't know about Miss Patrick before I visited the U of A archives. But through my visit, I learned that she's at the heart of the U of A history. And so imagine 1918, 1919, when these photos were taken. 1908, the U of A had just been established. 1918, the Department of Household Economics was established in the Faculty of Arts and Science. And Ms. Patrick was hired to develop the curriculum, to be the first instructor. And consider her context. The First World War was ending in 1918. The global flu pandemic with local impact was underway. And we were nearing the end of the Industrial Revolution, that 150 or so years of rapid development in industry associated with the Progressive Era, mechanization, urbanization, migration, and a shift in family life from families being producers in homes to working outside of home and consuming products. And what's the significance? New issues that were arising: urban housing, its quality, access to food, quality of that food. These issues shaped the early years of household economics education at the U of A. Where next? Well, what if we moved forward in time just past our Centennial halfway point? Did anyone here or online meet Dr. Empey, or study with Dr. Empey, or work with Dr. Empey? Yeah, more hands are going up. We could explore this history through her reminiscing in the student yearbook from 1974 and 1975. And a little excerpt here is, "It was interesting," this is her voice, "it was interesting to learn that the theme of your yearbook is nostalgia. Some of you may be aware that I have chosen to step down as director of the school and return to teaching and research on July 1st, 1976. I could not help but do a little reminiscing. When I was an undergraduate student in my final year of the BSc Household Economics program at the U of A in 1943, there were roughly 25 students in our class, and the school must have possessed not much more than roughly 4,000 square feet of space." And she continues and she wraps up with this lovely moment of gratitude for her colleagues and students as friends. Where do we start? This is a quotation from this book. I don't know if anybody recognizes this. Perhaps. The title is The Home Economist as a Helping Professional, 1984. I think a core text, perhaps, for some generations. Written by Dr. Diane Kieran, Dr. Eleanor Baines, Dr. Doris Badir. If you've traveled through Human Ecology 100 with me in the last 2 years, that systems theory chapter, it's from here. Still true. What is history? They wrote that the knowledge of the history of home economics is not a luxury. It is rather a necessity, and our survival as a profession depends upon our ability to preserve and interpret that history. What is history? I recently was in a diversity education workshop in December with Shakil Chaudhry, who's the author of the Deep Diversity Framework. And he started that workshop by saying, history is not at all in the past. History is in the present, influencing us in every single moment. Because history is our social norms, how we're dressed, how you chose to be seated, the protocol of how you are listening to me. He asks about history, who is centered, who is not. We are being marinated in history, including sexism, patriarchy, and legacies of colonization. I've been reflecting with these thoughts. Where do we start? Spray is a family theorist and has reflected in this way, and so I find myself, as we look back from the present, setting events into an order, we begin to see storylines, narratives and begin to realize that more than one narrative exists, narratives intersect, and issues fade and reappear over time. For example, this thought. More and more we are hearing economists, sociologists, and environmentalists with special concerns emphasizing the role which families and individuals play in the destruction, preservation of our environments and our economy. Decisions made daily with regard to the satisfaction of basic needs constantly infringe on mankind's relationships with the human and physical elements of the environment. Home economics, therefore, claims to study these relationships and provide viable alternatives from which individuals and families can choose. Is anyone surprised that that's from 1979? Dr. Doris Badir was dean of the faculty at that point. I think maybe it's the mankind that maybe gives it away a bit. What narratives are told about this history? Where from? Since its beginning, home economics has been remaking itself. And perhaps you do this, maybe you find yourself describing, oh, where have we come from? Maybe do you start with ancient Greece and the philosophy there and talk about oikos and how it means house and the idea of managing it? Or what about England in the late 1500s and philosophical conversations about theory and practice? Or maybe it's in the 1800s, in the Industrial Revolution, thinking about domestic economy, a Eurocentric discourse. Maybe it's the late 1890s, 1900s, and we're talking about professionalism. Or maybe it's this route about ecological ways of knowing and actually placing it in the last 40, 50 years since the 60s. Many stories could be told this evening. I invite us to consider 4 narratives or storylines that will spiral through time. A U of A storyline, an ecological lens storyline, an industrial era ideology storyline, and a coming together storyline. I'll offer an interpretation of a profession in the context of time and North American society, about a profession initially inspired in the 1890s by an ecological lens for understanding individuals and families in everyday life. But then in the early 1900s, a profession trivialized as women's work, not productive or profitable amid an industrial growth society. And yet, a profession that persisted, pushed against industrial era ideology until the ecological revolution gained momentum, starting in the 1960s, in time for this profession to rediscover its ecological roots, an approach to studying everyday life, not as trivial, but as essential, at the heart of a life-sustaining society. The U of A storyline. 1918, the Department of Household Economics is established in the Faculty of Arts and Science. 1928, it becomes the School of Household Economics. 1965-66, a new building on 112th Street, and organized into 3 divisions: foods and nutrition, clothing and textiles, general home economics. And that 3rd division, through what I'm learning through the 70s, actually becoming family studies. 1976, becoming Faculty of Home Economics. 1993, a reorganization on campus, in keeping with so many reorganizations in the province at that time. The Faculty of Home Economics merging into a new Faculty of Agriculture, Forestry, and Home Economics. Foods and nutrition, I understand, coming together with another academic unit, becoming the Department of Food and Nutritional Science. Clothing and textiles and family studies, becoming the Department of Human Ecology. In 2007, the faculty name changing to its present one. The Faculty of Agriculture, Life and Environmental Sciences, and the Department of Human Ecology in that. What did we look like? This is what we look like in the early part of this storyline. 1921 on the left. 1929. These are the girls and the staff except Miss Patrick. I'm curious about where she was. Could she have taken the picture? I don't know. This storyline also is a provincial story too. 1943, the first permanent district home economist was hired by the province, the Department of Agriculture. And in conversation with Kathleen Johnston, I learned really through your eyes the idea that the epitome of home economists mid-century into those decades, 50s and 60s and 70s, were district home economists. Catherine Chandler talked about that generalist degree. It was the #1 job you got, but the job you could get was a DHE. In the early 80s, it was kind of the end of the generalist degree. And that was part of the rural and urban changeover that was happening too. Through the 60s, a rapidly growing student body, and if you think about where the boomers are in time, many students overflowing actually that new building in the mid-60s, already running out of space. And then this ecological lens narrative. Please hold on to the first narrative. We're going to come back to that one, the U of A narrative. Here's the ecological lens narrative. The concept of ecology is part of our standard story, with roots to Ellen Swallow Richards in the 1890s, proposing a name for the field as home ecology. But that proposal was shut down during the Lake Placid conferences. Dr. Sue McGregor describes various scholars' efforts to track this ecological thread. The scholars describe a gap of 60 years from the early 1900s to the 1960s. And Sue McGregor writes that based on this standard story, many home economics programs and departments chose human ecology as a unifying philosophical perspective, explicitly changing their names, with some changing their identities to human ecology, beginning in the late 1960s. Dr. McGregor writes that this was a time in society, and now she's quoting Marjorie Brown, that emphasized holistic thinking and an emerging ecological consciousness. In the early 1960s, home economists felt that a holistic approach, again, was needed for investigating and solving modern problems of human societies. Apple and Coleman agree that human ecology is recognized as one of the historical transformations of home economics. In talking with you, Betty, about the name change here, you describe a lot of soul searching that happened when choosing a new name, and the name chosen was Human Ecology in 1993, in those years. Changing or claiming a name is not done lightly. Ayala Johnson also participated in this small research project. She identifies herself as a home economics teacher in British Columbia. She graduated from UBC with a master's. In addition to what you see on the screen, she also shared this with me. I think the term home economics inspires in people an understanding of the teaching of sewing, cooking, and family studies, while the term human ecology stimulates a much deeper conception of relationships among people and the environments they occupy, whether or not these relationships include domestic notions. And here we're picking up our third narrative, the industrial era ideology storyline, and it intersects with the ecological lens storyline. Through this project, I've grown more aware that this industrial era ideology may have forced that ecological lens out of sight in the early 1900s. This ideology promoted Eurocentric domesticity for girls and women. Feminist scholar Ferry described in 1990, the idea of housework as a distinctive form of labor emerged with industrialization in the 1800s as part of a gendered division of labor. And so a dominant narrative of gendered domestic training begins to shape our field before an ecological orientation can actually get rolling. ideology, a set of values, beliefs, myths, explanations, justifications, something that frames our moral reasoning, our interpersonal relationships, our ways of knowing, experiencing, judging. Our field has been shaped by North American society, which was shaped by colonialism, Eurocentrism, classism, patriarchy. What evidence do we have about this darker side of our history? One part of the storyline includes the home economics programs that were run in the residential school system. For example, Edmonton had an Indian residential school managed by the United Church of Canada. It ran from 1924 to 1960, operating as a residence and school with programs in home economics and industrial arts. 1960 to 68, it was still a residence for students, and then they would actually attend Jasper Place schools. It closed in 1968. In our historical record, in the 1981 Alberta Home Economics Association publication, there is a line. We put it down on print. There's not a lot. 1965, in the province, there were 295 home economics classrooms, including those at 4 Indian and 2 private schools. Girls were primed for domestic service in the schools. They were taught to do laundry, sew, cook, clean. This work was involuntary and unpaid. It was presented as practical training for the students, but many of the residential schools could not run without it. I imagine that staff who worked in residential schools and the 60s scoop had studied home economics at universities across Canada. However, in keeping with the spiral nature of our storyline, I've also come across an example of a scholarly effort to understand the traumatic effects of those schools, and it's a master's in science, family life education. Diane Renke in 1997 studied what were some of the results of these residential school experiences. We know that we continue to live with this legacy. And just to make sure I said that, Diane Renke, I haven't said her name out loud before, so I apologize if I'm mispronouncing it. She's a grad of the U of A. Yeah. We know that we continue to live with this legacy in Canadian society. This is part of home economics and human ecology history. That industrial era ideology runs through it. And this is painful. What do we do? Well, looking at the evidence is a step, and also looking and listening for moments in which home economists push back against that ideology is important too. Another part of this industrial era ideology storyline is this amazingly persistent cliche that this field is only about cooking and sewing. Can you believe that this public perception was already established in 1908, the same year that home economics is being chosen as a name? Can you believe that Miss Patrick was already pushing against the cliche in 1918? Perhaps you're not surprised that Doris Badir objected to it. Sue McGregor so clearly names the cliche for what it still is, part of this ideology, a dominant narrative of a society shaped by the Industrial Revolution. However, in addition to these dark aspects of the history, home economists have been pushing that ideology back, trying to clear it out of the way. And this effort spirals around in time with the feminist movement. Alice Chown and Caroline Hunt were part of the first wave of feminism. And consider these examples from second wave feminism. Home economists fought to change gender inequity in post-secondary contexts for women on campus, not just home economists. And so, Diane, you've described it was a transition for women's roles. We had no maternity benefits. If you had a baby, you came back in 2 weeks. We covered for you. With Doris Badir, the Academic Women's Association, we fought for opening daycares. We fought also for dual career couples. When my husband and I when we first came here, they only gave us one set of benefits. There were 2 of us. We had 2 full appointments. It took years for female professors to realize the discrepancies in pay and benefits that women experienced. Doris Badir was interested in the report on the Royal Commission on the Status of Women, which appeared in 1970. She was interested in what it meant for us as part of a system which educated at that time only women, and which carried a reputation for, in some perceived way, of holding women in traditional roles in patriarchal times. Diane Kieran, you have said it was uncomfortable. So lots of things that our faculty really worked on to see changes for women's rights, and of course, we're very active in the women's movement, even though the women's movement didn't want to accept home economists. You are the ones to blame for this, because you were interested in cooking and sewing. So then Doris and all of us had to argue, okay, how do we come to the table with you if you don't respect what we're about? It was uncomfortable. It was not easy to work on women's issues at first with the feminist movement because they wanted to shove us out and say that you would not be useful on our committee because you had contributed to this. There was a turning point. I think you just have to persist. Once they got to know us, we fought together for a lot of these policy changes. This winter, in conversation with Dr. Eleanor Baines, she reflected on why home economics and human ecology history has been so bumpy. In our culture, and I think this is true on an international level, domestic, women, everyday life tend to be trivialized and dismissed as unimportant. These roots have haunted the field, especially at the college, university level, and since most of these institutions are patriarchal, this is changing. When funding is cut, units of home economics and human ecology have been systematically downsized, relocated, and cut. There are very few units left in Canada and the United States. Programs in middle and secondary schools have thus been changed and cut. Bumpy history. Programs lost due to this industrial era ideology is what I'm thinking. And yet, another bright moment of resistance and persistence is apparent in the fourth narrative of coming together. This photo represents a special seminar in 1977 with Dr. Baines and Dr. Rogers from the University of British Columbia. They were invited to the U of A to engage in discussion with our faculty about the development of a new course, Perspectives in Home Economics. Now, if you remember, the generalist home economics undergrad degree was phased out, and I don't know the exact timing. 1970s is what I'm understanding. But in that same decade, this course is introduced, and that generalist identity was integrated into all 3 program divisions: foods and nutrition, clothing and textiles, family studies. To me, this seems like an intentional step into encouraging a shared generalist identity as home economists, even as students develop specialized knowledge. And this generalist identity was informed by an ecological lens. This seems like another deliberate push against the industrial era ideology and a call to wake up, becoming aware of the devastating impact of that ideology. Waking up, that's Ayala Johnson in our correspondence this winter. And she wrote, I think HE education, at least in the K-12 realm, is off on the wrong foot. Maybe just now starting to make a recovery. And I'm understanding that to mean a recovery from the industrial era ideology. 1973, Dr. Badir says home economics wants a new image. That road to that new image lies directly through the concerns of the women's movement. We must become involved and aware and conscious. It seems to me that she was suggesting that she and members of this academic unit at the U of A were aware of the need to push back that dominant narrative that trivialized everyday life as gendered domesticity. This storyline of coming together, 1936, Miss Patrick is saying, we in the profession must get together in the interests of our work. Roads, crossroads, transitions. These stories reflect not only pain, but also strength and belief in the importance of understanding individuals in the context of families, and families in the context of society, in interdependence, an ecological lens. It's persisting, its visibility fading, reviving. Home economists and those who identify as human ecologists are practicing an integrative approach to leadership, which is so needed. We are on the cusp of a shift. This is our present, a time of crises. As we continue to do research, to serve as practitioners, make policies as highly specialized professionals, as we facilitate undergraduate and graduate learning, this is a daunting scenario with at least 3 versions of reality. And here I'm starting to cite Joanna Macy. Our present. Well, we could continue on as business as usual in this industrial growth society. We could just sit back and watch the great unraveling. We could also step into this great turning, as Joanna Macy calls it, towards a life-sustaining society. And this recurring ecological lens, it's needed. It's a way for our profession to participate in this massive transition that's also known as the environmental or ecological revolution. As a profession, we're already familiar with cyclical, iterative systems, relational, cooperative, mutually influencing holism, awareness of capacities which can be nurtured through responsible use of resources toward balance and sustainability. We can bring our ways of knowing to conversations about the need for humanity to understand that we are part of nature, that we can create new ways of organizing our society. And given the dark sides of our past and our new awareness of our role in that past, including in the residential schools, I think we're well positioned to be part of that developing of new consciousness. And I think we can learn to see through the eyes of our current students. I'm thinking of millennials. And as I listen to you, I perceive that you bring some intuitive understanding of ecology and human ecology. I've been in conversation with Hannah Mason, who graduated just last spring with a major in nutrition and food science and a minor in human ecology. She's in Australia now doing a graduate program. She said, my most prominent memory of my first human ecology was when the PowerPoint started and the professor's pronouns were up on the screen. To me, that is human ecology. It was the consideration of how other people would be able to connect with their learning as soon as a collective safe space was created. I suggest that this prominent memory is linked to a generalist identity characterized by ecological consciousness. And this seems hopeful and helpful to me as we begin to realize the immensity of this industrial era ideology. And here's another example of this embedded nature of this ideology. Roberta McAdams, 1918, the same year that our unit is established. First woman in the British Empire to introduce a bill and see it pass into law. 1917, one of the first 2 women to be elected to a legislature in the British Empire. That's the Alberta legislature. 1916, lieutenant in the Canadian Army Medical Corps in the status of nursing sister. Oh yeah, and she was the sole dietitian in that corps. Yes, a dietitian. 1912, first supervisor of household science in the Edmonton Public Science School Board. She was instrumental in the establishment of women's institutes in Alberta. 1911, one of the 2 new positions created by the new government of Alberta to provide educational resources for rural farm women She was on those demonstration train. 1911, she graduated from the MacDonald Institute in Guelph. Adelaide Hoodless was part of that creation. She was a home economist, I'll say. Why and how is it that this incredible figure in Albertan and Canadian history is regarded as a nurse? Well, that was her official status in the Canadian Army Medical Corps. And Roberta herself described in 1939 in one of our Alberta Home Economics Association publications, the 1981. She wrote, "I was given nursing sister's rank since the Army knows of no other woman worker of commissioned rank." The Canadian Army didn't have an option, a box, a label for her. Roberta lived and breathed this ideology too, though, and she was focused on the everyday, which at the time was patriarchal, Eurocentric, classist, colonialist. This ideology constructed housework as women's work and as an expression of both love and subordination. So, home economics was reduced to women's work. But what if we were to push away that subordination part of the heritage and embrace the love part? We've got narratives that are painful, and yet they're important to consider. What if we were to listen to human ecology students who are bringing Indigenous knowledge into our classrooms and seeing these conceptual links with human ecology and yet also contradictions? Even though this profession has been trivialized, everyday life is more important than ever. Dr. Baines has observed that the evidence is overwhelming that family life is not only an important area of study by scholars, it is one that is needed. Amid the ecological revolution, what does everyday life look like now? We have potential allies in this work, including others who have been marginalized through the past century. There is a larger sphere of academic researchers out there identifying as human ecologists, and they can see us, we with our focus on the near, the intimate environments of everyday life. In a 2011 publication about Indigenous and wisdom traditions and human ecology, a U of A colleague, Dr. Macari Stewart-Harawira, a professor of Indigenous, Environmental, and Global Studies in the Department of Educational Policy Studies, described human ecology as a vast transdisciplinary field. And the field now includes such areas as urban sociology, cultural sociology, rural sociology, community studies, the study of deviance and illness, cultural religious movements, the family, and race relations, and the study of Indigenous knowledge, including biodiversity and practices of sustainability, which she also notes that the study of Indigenous knowledge has remained very much on the margins of human ecology. From what I can tell from this particular book, she's identifying with radical human ecology, and the radical part seems to refer to seeking to reawaken understanding of Indigenous knowledge, seeking to think in terms of feelings like love, seeking to work in terms of spirituality, and striving like us to be explicit about our long-held value orientation to help with compassion. How to proceed. Joanna Macy is a general systems scholar, also a Buddhist, and she has facilitated groups for over 40 years as they try to contribute to the ecological revolution. She's described this work as the spiral of the work that reconnects. And it starts with awareness of gratitude, then honoring the pain that has been caused and that exists, then seeing with new eyes, then going forth. So, let's take a clear view of reality. Let's ask, what are we hoping for? What direction are we hoping we'll move in? And then start taking steps to move in the direction of that hope. What if shedding that old ideology might be an opportunity to adopt with renewed intention the identity of human ecologist, an intentional merging of home economics with an ecological lens. Sue McGregor reports that Marjorie Brown, in 1993, an American scholar, did not think that the field then was ready, nor was a human ecological perspective developed well enough for our field to adopt the term human ecology as an identity. I'd like to suggest that with this clear view of reality that we can develop, we are ready to keep reaching out to breathe new life into the generalist identity. Once again, because, as Diane, you've said, that's what holds us together. It's such an important connection. What if we choose to be allies with Indigenous scholars, radical human ecologists, and the larger human ecology sphere, and with everyone else who is thinking and working with systems thinking in an ecological lens? Yes, we have been part of an industrial growth society with all of its ideology that has marginalized so many. Are we complicit? Yes. And understanding that helps us to see with new consciousness, an ecological consciousness. I've focused on 4 storylines spiraling through time. A U of A storyline, an ecological lens, an industrial era ideology, a coming together. When these stories are pieced together, they're contributing to a shift from an industrial growth society to a life-sustaining society, bit by bit, in everyday life. And so, as we lean into the great turning, which I think is a revolution, revolving, of ecological consciousness, who are we? What are your pronouns? How will you sign that signature quilt? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sherry Ann, and happy birthday. I think we can agree your presentation was very engaging and thoughtful. I'm thinking that the perspectives you shared with us will hopefully help us to reflect more broadly on the significance of the past 100 years of our discipline, and perhaps to cause us to more deeply appreciate those alumni and faculty and students who came before us. But I really liked the phrase you used as well when you said thinking about who we're working with now and how those people can help us inform the future. And I think that's such a positive note to bring to our attention. So could we have another round of applause for our speaker, please? Yeah. But we're not letting Sherry Ann off the hook yet, because we do have some questions and answers to consider. Just before we get to that, though, just a couple of other announcements. As Deanna said, I hope you will stay for refreshments. And that you will participate in posing for pictures in front of our picture wall in the lobby. These will be available to download next week, the week of March 19th, next week. There's an email address that we can share with you so you can find those pictures. And lastly, just thinking forward a little bit and continuing our Centennial celebration, there will be, and we hope you mark your calendar, an Alumni Weekend dinner on the Friday evening of Alumni Weekend, Friday, September 21st, to celebrate the Centennial and inviting alumni from Human Ecology and Home Economics to gather that evening at the Faculty Club. All right, so now let's proceed with Q&A. I think probably it makes sense to invite people to come to either of the microphones here if you have questions to present to Sherry Ann, and My colleague Raina is going to be fielding some of the questions that might be coming from Calgary. So people want to step up? Yeah? Sherry-Ann, do you want to maybe come back up front?
It's not a question so much as this morning I opened at random a book that I do that too in the mornings. It's called Simple Abundance by Sarah Van Breathnach. And in it, right there, perfect for today, she quotes a woman and scholar from 1918 who said, "The real is the sole foundation of the ideal." And in some ways, I felt that that encapsulates our approach too. The real is the sole foundation of the ideal.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It feels like a spiral too. I feel like that could be said throughout this century, trying to find our way. Thank you.
Yes, now, human ecology. To me, it's one thing that is very important is the food that we eat, because our health is dependent on it, and it must be a subject in your area too. I wonder if you're also part of your study is how GMO affects our food supply and whether it's good for us or something for the future. I just wonder if it's even included in the curriculum.
Well, thank you, Reiner, for being so confident. This is the generalist and specialist dynamic now. I identify with human ecology, and I've had the opportunity to study in the area of later life families, gerontology, and family studies. And so I don't know the answer to that specialist question. But I know that there's been important writing in our alumni magazine and referring to the larger faculty. So I don't know if anyone else in the room might be able to respond. I welcome your help. It's a good question, Reiner. And in terms of that larger human ecology angle, it's right in the mix of it. You're right, in terms of how are we managing to grow in a balanced and sustainable way food that is healthy. Thank you for the question. Thank you. Thank you.
We've nothing from Calgary so far, so we can spend more time with questions from the audience here. Yeah? Great.
There's one important person that was not mentioned, and that was Hazel McIntyre. She was an instructor here for, I do have the number of years, and she was also the dean from 1956 to 1960. She was also a teacher of Dr. Empey's as well. So
Thank you.
I don't think this was mentioned. She was a very important person.
Thank you for bringing her name into this event. I've seen her name as I've been combing and reading. Thank you for naming her. Thank you. Thank you.
Wow, we're almost on time, too. So thanks very much for your attention this evening. We're so glad you could join us. Please come and enjoy some of the refreshments in the foyer, and Sherry-Ann is available for more discussion, I'm sure. And there is information, as Deanna mentioned, on the signature quilt. So if you would like to learn more about how you can add your name to the quilt, we'd be happy to share that information with you as well. So let's adjourn to the foyer. Thanks again.